Hi, welcome to the Israel First television program from our studios in Jerusalem, bringing you news and interviews from the land. And today in the studio we have David Bedein, and we're going to be talking about all sorts of issues. In particular, great to have you with us, David. In particular, we're going to be talking about the issues of the Palestinian Authority, the peace process, and some of the issues regarding the refugees. And I've just pulled out a story from the Daily Express. It's not often that I go back to the UK newspapers, but this is the Daily Express newspaper, and if I can just get that on the screen, it says fury as UK foreign aid money is spent on funding Palestinian terror schools. Fury as UK foreign aid is spent on funding Palestinian terror schools. And the stories from the Daily Express, which is a very reputable paper, and many of the viewers in the UK will obviously know it very well. It says, furious campaigners condemned UK foreign aid money being used by Palestinian schools to poison children's minds. Taxpayers' money is funding schools which promote terrorism and child soldiers. Britain is this year giving the Palestinian Authority £25 million, not quite sure what that is in dollars, to promote health and education in the West Bank. But 24 schools are named after terrorists, including one of them leaders of the militant group Hamas. So a big outroar in the United Kingdom, and people are beginning to wake up to this issue. So we have David Bedein. Thank you so much for coming into the studio today, David. David is originally from the United States. He's a writer and investigative journalist. He's the bureau chief and founder of the Israel Resource News Agency and the president of the Center for Near East Policy Research. He's covered the Middle East peace negotiations, reported for CNN Radio and the BBC, written for the Los Angeles Times, Jerusalem Post, and the Times of Israel, and is the author of The Roadblock to Peace and the Genesis of the Palestinian Authority. Now, we're going to be speaking about both those books and how you can order those today. So those are important books. We're going to be talking about those on the program. David has investigated the Palestinian Authority and the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East, which is called UNRWA. Those are its initials, revealing the promotion of anti-Semitism and incitement to violence. He's also produced investigative films showing the activities of UNRWA, and we'll be going to look in the program today at some of those films and camps, and it's also shown interviews with staff and students. Now, David, we've got your books in the studio, and just before we even get into all of this, is it because I know what will happen, that you at home will say, we want to get this book, we want to have this is a book we'd like on our bookshelf. This is the Genesis of the Palestinian Authority, and the other book we're going to be talking on the program today is The Roadblock to Peace. So what's the best way for the viewers who are watching today?
Amazon.
They can go to Amazon?
Make it simple, Amazon.
So if you go to Amazon and order those today, if you look up David Bedein on Amazon, and you'll be able to get those books today and order those. Or if you can't, I know some of you are not so computer au fait, then get a friend or a relative to help you with that. So David, as we start the program and look at all these issues, I know that you're the bureau chief of the Israel Resource News Agency. Why can you tell us why there was a need for another news agency, bearing in mind so many news agencies are based in Jerusalem, the BBC, Sky News, Fox News, with the list is pretty much endless. Why was there a need for another news agency?
30 years ago, the Israel Resource News Agency began in order to compete with the plethora of Arab news agencies operating in Jerusalem and feeding the foreign media with information, sometimes with disinformation. What we discovered over the years, especially from the time of the Lebanese War in 1982, was that an effort was made to make the PLO terrorist operation look reasonable, look academic, look as if all they wanted to do is have their place in the sun. And one of the egregious things we discovered from one of the PLO news agencies was their training of people who had committed acts of murder to say they were human rights activists who were sitting in jail for just because they were demonstrating for human rights. And when a very reasonable fellow comes to you, to a news agency, and says, look, I was in jail for 10 years because I held a sign for peace. And often the news agency doesn't research to see what his criminal background is, or to bring out the families of the people that he murdered. And our function is not to be propaganda, but simply to bring the facts. For 30 years in front of the foreign press and also the local press in Israel, who sometimes become mesmerized by a terrorist organization that disguises itself as something else.
And this is really the point of the book, The Genesis of the Palestinian Authority, a book that you can get hold of today. The whole point of this book is really to let people know the real story.
That's correct.
Behind the Palestinian.
There are 387 news stories in there, which our agency produced over a period of 25 years since the inception of the Palestinian Authority. There's nothing new there, except everything's forgotten. When we publish a story which shows that the Hamas has been receiving its weaponry through the Western countries and even through Israel, and that's been forgotten. When we show how we commissioned translations of all of the new Palestinian Authority school books, which were supposed to be for peace, which we got after we asked Yasser Arafat, the founder of the PLO, to get it for us, and he said, certainly, so long as you give publicity. That's exactly what we did. And we show that these schools are training manuals for war. And ironically,
right,
the first person to give us credibility on that was the Pope's ambassador, the late Archbishop Pietro Sambi, who looked at the books and he brought them to the Pope, Pope John Paul II, and they determined these are books of war, preparing children for war.
So what we're talking about, and maybe we'll even go to the video in one second, but what we're talking about is school children in the Palestinian Authority in classes. This is normal classes. This is not like special schools.
That's correct.
This is just the general school that any kid in the Palestinian Authority may be enrolled in. Their textbooks, you found out what was being said in the textbooks.
Certainly, when you have children learning about jihad, holy war, when you have children learning that Israel doesn't exist and has to be replaced by Palestine by force of arms, and when the Palestinian Authority school books and schools are placed inside UNRWA camps, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, with an aura of the United Nations. The theme of the United Nations is peace starts here, except they're teaching them war. And the person who won the award, we have stories about this, as the charmer of the Palestinian Authority schools and of UNRWA schools, Mohammed Asaf, who sings songs about murdering Jews. Now, what's very newsworthy here in these, we also got from the Constitution of the Palestinian Authority, which has been forgotten, to create a state based on Sharia law, not just Sharia law like you might have in places like Indonesia or Tunis, where the Sharia law is tolerant, no tolerance for anything but radical Islam. The radical Islamic state being created has been ignored because their PR people and their charming people. Look, I had one interview with Arafat where the person who was sitting next to me happened to be someone from intelligence who looked at him and he viewed him. I said, well, what did you think of this guy? And he said, well, if I didn't know who he was, I would say he was one of the most charming people I've ever met, incapable of violence. Except that Arafat's spokesman told us in an interview 4 years before, you can trust Arafat. He's only killed 12 people with his own hands. Very charming. But this is a guy in his body language comes off like Mr. Clean, and the same guy who, when I covered his Nobel Peace Prize, I flew to Norway and covered him getting the Nobel Peace Prize, I asked some tough questions. Mr. Arafat, Mr. Rabin and Mr. Peres say you're going to crush Hamas and cancel the Palestinian Covenant, which calls for the destruction of Israel. He says, I don't understand your question. He said to me publicly in front of 250 reporters, the Hamas are my brothers. So then he didn't want to answer about the PLO covenant, so I disrupted him and said, what about the PLO covenant? I don't have to do that. And then we were the agency, our agency was the agency that had a crew inside the Palestine National Council, the only crew, because that day was Israel Independence Day, everyone was off from work, and we showed that they did not cancel the PLO covenant, was the basis of the entire agreement.
Which is the destruction of Israel.
Absolutely. So
do you think that, I mean, many of our viewers will be watching today, and some of them will be very confused by the whole issue, but it's quite straightforward really, isn't it? It's the Palestinian Authority are really promoting terrorism, promoting
Yes.
the destruction
Promoting
of
war.
Israel.
Promoting war, that's the issue.
Promoting war. And if anybody else did that in the world, any other country was doing that on a regular basis in its schools, in its constitution, that would be something everybody would be talking about. Do you think that many people know the story behind?
Absolutely not. We worked with BBC for 10 years on their religious affairs department in the 90s. And as you mentioned, I was the correspondent for CNN Radio for a while, and I worked with NBC and many other important news outlets. And those news outlets put it aside because not only is it not politically correct, it's not convenient. And one of the things that the Western world can't understand, I mean, there's 30 billion shekels of products. I don't know how much of that is in pounds or dollars, but 30 billion shekels of products that Israel exports to the Palestinian Authority. Now, the average Western mind is, if you're doing business with them, there must be peace. But it's the opposite. They view that as what they call in Arabic bakshish, bribery, just to tribute, to keep them quiet. They don't view that as a peace process. However, these are very charming people, and they'll just look you straight in the face and say, there's no war advocacy in our schools, but we filmed the military training taking place in coordination with Hamas, and we interviewed the leaders of Hamas who praise UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, for such wonderful cooperation they get in training 50,000 children, not only to throw rocks, but to how to operate AK-47s, how to M16s, Kalashnikovs. And the children, as a gift, get to take them home.
And you've got some film of this.
Absolutely.
So maybe for our viewers, it'd be good now to go to see this excerpt from the video, and you will see with your own eyes what's happening in the Palestinian Authority.
What if a secretive United Nations organization existed that employed murderers and terrorists, that hired trained killers as school principals, that brainwashed children in Islamic fundamentalism, that handed out machine guns to kids as young as 8 years old, that created a propaganda machine using social media to encourage students to kill people just because they were part of a different religion? Such an organization exists. It is called the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, also known as UNRWA. Over the years, it has raised billions of dollars from Western countries, with the United States serving as the lead donor and patron. Just last year, its budget was $1.2 billion, with $400 million coming from the U.S. UNRWA was created after the 1948 Arab-Israeli War as a temporary agency to assist Arab refugees. Now, nearly 70 years later, UNRWA functions as a propaganda and military tool of the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. For years, UNRWA has been shrouded in secrecy with little accountability to donor nations, all while serving as a base for Arab terror operations. Terrorists have used UN facilities as rocket launching pads. Inside its classrooms, teachers indoctrinate 500,000 kids each day about becoming Islamic martyrs for the sake of Allah. UNRWA also endorses the so-called right of return to villages that are now part of Israel. In its school curriculum, it rejects the notion of coexistence and calls for an armed struggle against Israelis. UNRWA's leaders also serve as an extension of the Palestinian regime. 2 high-ranking UNRWA officials are now members of the Hamas cabinet. Meanwhile, the incitement continues, and there is no sign that an end to the violence is near. Logic dictates that if there is no change in the curriculum in Palestinian schools, these students will become the next generation of jihadists in the Middle East.
So that's quite shocking to see those kind of things, David. And you've got other videos as well?
Absolutely. If you look in the classrooms, we have 5 short films of the classrooms in the UNRWA schools, where the children learn by rote the concept of taking back the areas that were lost in 48 and killing the people who live there. And over and over and over, we do these very matter-of-fact interviews with spokespeople of the Palestinian Authority and UNRWA who justify this method of teaching. And what we show in the classrooms, what we've been able to film in the classrooms, is exactly that. Children who are very, very innocent, becoming not only brainwashed, but indoctrinated for war. That their job in life is to kill off the Jews. And we've never had a system. It's like Murder Incorporated. Murder Incorporated. There's never been a school system ever to teach the murder of Jews. You can say, what about Nazi Germany? Well, Nazi Germany taught the demonization of Jews and tried to hush up any calls for murder. Here, there's no hushing up. There was never a precedent in Nazi Germany of naming schools, schoolyards, any soccer tournaments for people who carried out executions of Jews. It was done quietly. Here, they're very proud of it.
And what's so terrible, David, is not only is that happening, which is so strange in a world which is so politically correct, and you can't say this in schools and you can't say that in schools, and suddenly they're doing all of this, but it's being paid for by taxpayers from the West.
The Western mind, the United States government gives 1/3 of the UNRWA budget. The UK gives 10% of the UNRWA budget. Sweden, Norway give a lot, and the European Union 1/3 of the budget. Now, when we've confronted them, they said, we hear other information. So when we try to have presentations at the embassies here, there's a lot of resistance. We've been at the British Parliament 4 times, and colleagues of mine have also been at the British Parliament. And when we raise issues, now I'm a social work professional who works in the media. When we raise issues, however, of transparency and accountability, that's when they listen. Transparency and accountability. Why is there a medical crisis in Gaza when so much money has been given for the medical services? There's more than 100 agencies giving money for medical services. Because you take the medical supplies, sell them on the open market, and exchange it for munitions. That's why there's sometimes a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, but also in Judea, Samaria, West Bank.
Now, there'll be people watching today who'd like to advocate, who'd like to get involved in supporting the work. What's the best way they can get in touch with you?
Well, on the website, IsraelBehindTheNews.com, we indicate how people can get involved and sponsor activities. How about sponsoring a monthly event at each parliament which gives money to UNRWA? That's number one. Number two, for the press. The press are overwhelmed. I can name 28 organizations in Jerusalem alone that advocate the Arab position that what they were doing is totally innocuous. They even have it's like a George Orwellian situation. There's a school that shows what a peace curriculum, except the peace curriculum isn't being taught, and the 28 organizations swallow that. If we had the funds, we would have monthly briefings for every parliament and for every media operation. Now, I find, and this is after 30 years of working in this field, is that when journalists are confronted with the fact that Palestinian Arabs are the regular Palestinian Arabs maybe want peace, but there's a totalitarian entity which is stealing the money and preparing them for war, and perhaps one of the most egregious moments of our work when we met with Bassem Eid, the head of the Palestinian Human Rights Council, and he documented that in order to work for the Palestinian Authority, you had to prove that you killed fellow Arabs who were pro-Israel. The requirement of a job description to show that you've conducted acts of murder, there is no precedent for this. But the fact is that this is being ignored by the Western media. Very, very few media, Jewish, Christian, or otherwise, know this. Our job is to let our people know. People do not know. Let my people know is the theme. They have to know this in order to, because we're about to face a new round of fighting. Back in 2002, one of the documents that was discovered in Arafat's office when the IDF went in there was a document of Arafat calling together all of his people. We need more dead children. We need more dead children to make our case. And that's exactly what they're planning now. The thousands of children being trained to go to the front. And each child, I know from the Arab media professionals we work with, has a YouTube profile, little Mustafa, little Muhammad, and you'll see on our programs, on our videos, which are all on our website, IsraelBehindTheNews.com, the children are speaking matter-of-factly of their dedication to jihad, holy war, and to die. So that if thousands of children die, one of the greatest anti-Semitic themes over the centuries was that Jews kill children. Well, that's what's going to be very soon, and that is going to be a cause of anti-Semitism around the world. The anti-Semitic, and they're going to forget that these children were armed, because it's not convenient to think that a child knows how to handle an M16, AK-47, or a Kalashnikov. This is not something which people understand or believe that this could be possible in the modern world, but they are. And again, if it was Iran that was preparing these kids, well, that's one thing. Yes, Iranian weaponry gets in there, but the funding, where they get the cash, is from funds that come in for humanitarian services that are not checked. And we did meet with the head of the DFID in London, the heads of the DFID in London, and they were very concerned. And for a while, they suspended the aid. We don't know if they've continued the aid or whatever, because the system continues. Steal humanitarian funds and put it into munitions, into the war machine. Also inside Jerusalem, you mentioned West Bank. In Jerusalem, we have about 20% of the children, Arab children in Jerusalem, learn in these UNRWA schools, which because of pressure from abroad, they're not supervised even by Israel. And they're learning inside Jerusalem. Did Jews come back to Jerusalem to have schools that would teach kids to murder Jews? But that's what's going on.
And one of the, it's a shock, or there's so many shocking things in all this revelations. And if you're watching today, don't forget to get hold of the book, The Genesis of the Palestinian Authority, from David Bedein. That's on Amazon. Also, his book, The Roadblock to Peace. Thank you so much for coming in the studio today, David. So much very important information for our viewers to know. I know that many of you are advocates for Israel and will want to help and want to support and want to get the books. Don't forget, you can contact David. He will let you know.
Remember one theme, if you remember nothing else: condition support for the negotiation process on the change in the education system. Without peace education, there is no peace. Make that point to everyone. Even people who are pro-Arab understand that.
Thank you so much, David, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Okay, today we are looking at something different than the month and the year and the time. We are looking at the name animal, which is chaya in Ivrit, in Hebrew, and the plural is chayot. And let us see in Genesis what's happening. Genesis 2, and it's the verse 19. Out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field, so that beast is chaya, and every bird of the heavens, which is off, like also the name for chicken, funny enough, is the same name, every bird of the heavens, and brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. And whatever Adam called each living soul, that was his name. So this is very interesting, because you can see God created the heaven and the earth, he created the animals, and now he's saying to man, I want you to be a co-worker with me. And now I want you to give names to the animals. Now we already spoke about that, and it's important. The Hebrew name carry really the essential nature of what the thing is designed for. Okay, so when Adam giving a name to the animals, he was giving not just a name, but you can feel the essential nature of what is the animal. So we can look, for example, at certain animals. One that we know all is Kelev, which is a dog. And Kelev is Ke and Lev, and is like Ke and Lev Mahat. And you know how the dog is called the best friend of man. And so this is one of them. There is another one which is beautiful also, is Pil, which is elephant. And why is it Pil, you will say? But when you look at the verb behind Pil, the verb is called Poel. And Poel is doing. And obviously we know that an elephant can do so much work because they are big and strong. So this is the name for elephant, Pil. There is another beautiful name also, like when we look at Of Hashamayim, the birds of the heavens, of Hashamayim, there is one little bird which is called Dror, which is the sparrow. And again, the name is very interesting. It's Dror for sparrow, but it's Dror also for freedom and liberty. So again, you know how a sparrow, obviously, if you put him in a cage, a bird cage, he will die. He can't be restrained in something. He loves his freedom. Now, another name also that we can look at is parpar, butterfly. And one day because I knew a bit about, like, we can look at the verb and find the essence, I was like, what is parpar, butterfly? What is his nature? And I look, and the name is pirper. And the verb pirper means to struggle. So you can see this larva who's going into a cocoon, and this cocoon, the larva has to struggle to get out of it to be a beautiful butterfly, and this is really the nature of a butterfly. He has to struggle to be beautiful, and sometimes even in our life we can think that we can be struggling to go to a new level, and it's part of life. Now, let us remember, the name Chaya is animal, and Chayot is the plural, and this is for wild animals. If you look at domestic animals, is Behema, and for the plural, it will be Behemot. So isn't it exciting to see few names of animals and really see that the Hebrew language carries something very deep inside, so we can know the essence of why animals are called in a certain way. And this is what we've done today, and see you next week. Bye.
Well, thank you so much for coming into the studio today, David. We've really enjoyed the program with you, looking at the roadblock to peace, looking at the Palestinian Authority, what's happening with all the money that's been given to them, particularly regards to the so-called refugees and the schools. Don't forget, you can email us. We love to receive your emails at info@israelfirst.org. Visit our website, www.israelfirst.org. And don't forget, we're the program that looks at the land, the people, and the language.